be fixed on Mission Boulevard, who would you go to? Would you ask your local city council person or your local congressperson? If you have an idea regarding the California drought, who would you contact about it? Would you contact the President of the United States, the Governor of California, or your city mayor? So before I go further and discuss how all of that relates to my topic of federalism, how many people here know what federalism is? I show of hands. Great. Well, federalism is a sharing of powers between the national and the state governments, and it's a concept that truly shapes how this country functions today. And I believe that federalism is one of the most important aspects of the Constitution, even though it may not be explicitly stated in it. Federalism has a rich background as for why it was created by the Founding Fathers in the past, has been developed several times since then to make it what it is today in the present, and directly relates to each and every single person in this room, and will continue to do so in the future. When the Founding Fathers were writing the Constitution, they realized that they needed a system of government that allowed for both the national government to have power, along with the individual state governments. According to constitutional scholar Linda R. Monk, the Articles of Confederation, which was the first constitution that created a league of sovereign state governments, was barely sufficient enough to hold the states together. Monk goes on to say that the states were really divided amongst each other and didn't really have a uniform system of how to carry out the nation's important aspects, such as how to work military affairs and foreign policy. But also, the Congress that was in place at the time was really weak, had no real economic power. So as a result, the nation was in a real economic downfall. So as a result, the Founding Fathers realized that they needed a system of government that included a strong national government, as stated by the University of Louisiana's political science professor, Ellis Katz, but also supplementary state governments that could carry out the powers that were not explicitly given to the national government. They specifically outlined that they needed a strong centralized government that could directly represent the people, but what was more important to them, according to Katz, was that the state governments were the principal policymakers, while the national government would be the one that was more involved in the issues that impacted the nation as a whole, such as foreign policy, commerce, and military affairs. However, since the creation of federalism by the Founding Fathers, it has drastically changed. The first major change of federalism, according to researcher and author Wayne Moore in his research paper in 2011, occurred after the Civil War, when it was argued whether or not slavery could be an issue of the states or the national government. And after the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which abolished slavery, gave rights to the newly freed slaves, and allowed those newly freed slaves the right to vote, it was clear that the Constitution held more power and significance over the laws created by the state governments. Moore also asserts that the second major change in federalism occurred in the 1950s and the 1960s, or what was known as the Civil Rights period. This was when the national government was seen as the primary defender of civil rights and civil liberties, as seen by the Supreme Court ruling against racial segregation and laws against women, both of which were actually allowed by some states during that time period. And these two events, both after the Civil War and during the Civil Rights period, were major change. It's exactly what federalism is. It's the dividing of powers between the state government and the national government, and determining which level gets to impact which issues. And that kind of trend is seen even today. For example, the debate over the legalization of marijuana is right now going on a state-by-state basis, but it could change within the next couple of years, whether the national government decides to make a law on it or the Supreme Court decides to rule on it. And an example of an issue that was actually taken up by the Supreme Court was the legalization of same-sex marriage. Previously it was taken on a state-by-state basis before the Supreme Court actually ruled on it just last year. And if we see this trend continue, we basically see the national government just impeding more and more on the powers that the Founding Fathers actually intended for the state governments. So how does this all relate to you as students and members of the coming generation? One of the major issues that federalism has is education. According to educational scholars Frederick Hess and Andrew Kelly in their 2015 article, education is one of the most debated topics for federalism, as the national government has tried many times to take control of education, as seen by the No Child Left Behind program implemented by President Bush in 2001, and the Race to the Top program implemented by President Obama in 2009. In fact, several scholars, such as Aaron Lawson in the Law Journal published in 2013, have advocated for a reduced involvement of the federal government in education, specifically K-12 education. Lawson also states that state governments have tried to argue that education is an issue that should be left up to the states, as the national government is really in no place to fix these schools and allow the sufficient grants needed to fund these schools. So as we move on into the future, how will this change in federalism impact the future generation? It starts at the local level. As stated by Hess and Kelly, starting referendums and voicing opinions about certain issues to the national government and to the state governments is how federalism will continue and how it will hopefully continue to thrive in the future. So to summarize, federalism has a rich background as for why it was developed by the Founding Fathers in the past, has been changed and developed several times since then to make it what it is now, and directly impacts everyone here and will continue to do so in the future. What federalism allows this country to do is create different levels of government that have different powers, which is why it's possible to get a stop sign fixed by going to your local city council instead of waiting for months on end for your local congressperson to come in and then maybe fix it. Federalism works because of the shared powers at each level and will hopefully continue to work well into the future.